Okay, we're going to get started. Thanks so much for your patience this morning. As just kind of behind the scenes look, one of the things we endeavor to do is be efficient with our time. At times that requires us to run over a little bit, but typically before these sessions happen, we actually have our strategic planning committee meeting because we have members that of the committee that aren't living on campus, so we try to make that efficient. So apologize at times when we start a little bit late from running to meeting. But thank you for being here. This is number 3. May have just loaded. This is number 3 of our education series as the Strategic Planning Committee has invited the community to not only educate itself regarding trends in the industry and things going on in the wider world, but also to further your own thought process as you start to give input into the strategic planning process. So today, our guest is Steve Lindsay. Steve is president and CEO of Garden Spot Village out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. One of the things that you may not know is that Steve utilized the architectural firm RLPS. That may sound familiar because it's the same firm that we've used for many years here at Collington. And so as we were looking at communities to really get some inspiration around what does it look like to consider a second dining venue, amongst other things, one of the places that RLPS suggested was Garden Spot Village. During that time, I got to know that community, but subsequently, I got to hear from Steve Lindsay regarding innovations that they've achieved and sought after at Garden Spot Village over the years. He's presented in numerous formats, including Leading Age Maryland, Friends Services for the Aging's annual conference, and the most impressive would be today here at Collington, of course. So, Steve, just want to thank you for being here today and taking the time to be a part of our community and our shared learning, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Marvell, and thanks to all of you for coming. Appreciate just the opportunity to be here and bring greetings from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. I was sharing with some folks. Can you hear okay with this microphone? Is that coming through? Great. Sharing with some folks a little bit earlier that for me, a traffic jam is like 3 horse and buggies in a row going down the road, you know. So it was a little bit different coming down here today and just having to contend with your traffic near Washington here. But just appreciate the opportunity to be here and share a little bit. And what I want to do today is just share around some thoughts about innovation. And that is something that we have talked about. We've worked on a little bit at Garden Spot Village over the years. And so I have 10 or so ideas that I want to share and just some ways that we've tried to implement or utilize those ideas as we have studied this idea of innovation and how to create a culture that focuses around innovation. And that's not to say we're experts at it. We are certainly on a journey, the same as you are. And we'll just have an opportunity to share out of our journey and with the appropriate level of humility, knowing that we have not yet arrived in this thing. So we're going to start with a little bit of discussion about a television show. In a television show that was on a few years ago. It was ABC Primetime, and on this particular episode, they did an interesting kind of sociological study. They identified 12 strangers beforehand, people who had never met one another. They paired them up, so each person got a partner, and they started them in these various locations around Manhattan. Now, if you know anything about Manhattan, you know that it is just kind of this crazy urban beehive of people. There's just millions of people all in a fairly concentrated portion of land. And the idea was that they would take these 6 pairs of people, start them out at different locations, one pair at Columbia University, one at the Roosevelt Island Tram, one at the Javits Convention Center, Washington Square Park, Brooklyn Bridge, and so forth. And they gave them a very simple set of instructions. They said, you have 5 other pairs of people who are looking for you somewhere in the city. You have to find them. That's all the instruction they got. They said, how you do it is up to you. I think they gave them like $80 that they could use to fund their journey. and their search that day, but it started out about 9 o'clock in the morning, just knowing that there was another pair of people out there that was looking for them. They needed to find that other pair of people. Complete, absolute strangers, had no idea what they looked like, who they were, anything about them, and so they set out. And that's one of those things you would think would just be an absolutely impossible task, that it would be just so difficult with all those people, not knowing where you're going to meet, not knowing how you're going to meet, not knowing what they look like. Even if you knew what somebody looked like, it would be difficult to accomplish that. But it's not as hard, perhaps, as you might think. And we can start off just thinking about it a little bit here today. If you were in New York City, and you were there about 9 o'clock in the morning, and you had to meet somebody, where would you go to meet them?
Depends who they are.
Okay, Grand Central Station, Times Square, Central Park, Trump Tower. So there's a lot of different ideas, but everybody kind of has a starting point. And so as those pairs got together and they started talking with their other person, they sort of had that same thing. Well, let's go to this location and see if we can find somebody. Interestingly enough,
TV doing it, it is obviously the ABC studios, right?
well, that's an idea too. It could be the ABC studios. So they started out, and if you were there at 9 o'clock in the morning and you had to meet somebody, what time would you designate to meet them? Noon. So interestingly enough, at 12 noon on that same day, 3 of the pairs met at Times Square, and 3 of the pairs met at the Empire State Building. So folks who were fans of Sleepless in Seattle went right to the Empire State Building. And so they all had an opportunity. But interestingly enough, out of all those millions of people who were there that day, they found these other people, identified them, and in just a couple of hours at those 2 locations. And the reason that they were able to do that is that we tend to think in fairly routine manners. We tend to be fairly predictable. And the idea is that if we want to be innovative in the way we operate, in the way we function as organizations and as individuals, we have to begin to think and begin to act in unpredictable ways. We have to break out of those normal routines, those set patterns that we function with. Now, it didn't happen to me today, but a lot of times, when I'm driving, I'll get home at the end of a day, and I'll pull into my driveway, and I'll realize I don't remember anything about that drive. I got home safe, thankfully, but I was kind of on autopilot. And that's the way we function a lot of times in the course of our life. We go through autopilot. And so the idea, if we're going to be innovative, the first idea is we have to break out of that. We have to force ourselves out of our comfort zones. We have to do things that are a little bit different for us and a little bit unpredictable, perhaps. The idea is if you want to do the things that no one else is doing, you have to stop doing the things that everyone else is doing. Because that just can consume all of your time. And the reason we have to do this is that the world is changing very quickly. Now, these are 2 photos taken from the same vantage point at the Vatican, and it was similar situations. The first was the announcement of Pope Benedict in 2005. The second was the announcement of Pope Francis in 2013. So there was just 8 years difference. Similar situations, similar announcements, papal announcements, but you can see the difference in the 2 pictures. On the top picture in 2005, if you looked real close, I think you can identify a couple of flip phones in there somewhere. But as you look at the bottom picture in 2013, just 8 years later, everybody has basically a computer in their hand. Everybody has a smartphone. They're all taking pictures. They're wired in. They're connected with the internet. And that's the reality that we live with, where people are connected. They have more information available to them than ever before in history. And people have different expectations because of that. And so we have to be able to respond to those expectations. As organizations, we have to be able to serve people in ways that they want to be served. And so we have to think about innovation in a little bit different ways. And for me, the starting point when I think about innovation, let me just share this great quote here real quick. And this was, somebody said this about a year ago. He said, "The pace of change will never again be as slow as it is today. As quickly as we think things are changing, that's just going to continue to speed up over the course of time. And so as we think about that, we just recognize that we have to be incredibly innovative in order to continue to maintain our organizations as viable organizations going into the future. And one of the starting places for me is always with our mission statement. We are a Mennonite retirement community in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and our mission statement is to enrich the lives of older adults as an expression of Christ's love. And so we want to do those two things. We want to make people's lives more rich, more full, more meaningful, and we just want to love on them and create an environment where people love others and are loved at the same time. And so that becomes the focal point of everything that we do. We start with our mission statement and everything that we try and do. Now, an example of how that plays out in terms of innovation, a few years ago we were talking about our healthcare center. We had a skilled nursing facility. We only opened in 1996, so we're not that old of an organization, but our first skilled nursing facility was built in 2001. And in 2001, it was built in a manner that kind of looked like most nursing homes. It had the long hallways, it had the big massive nurses station, it had the call bells and the blinky lights and the buzzers that were going off all day long, the medication carts were going up and down the hallway. It was fairly typical for a nursing home, but it looked and felt more like a hospital than it did home. And so we recognized that the campus was growing. We needed to expand the size of that service area. And so we started talking about what would it look like if we actually lived our mission in skilled nursing. Now, we had always provided good quality care. We had great surveys. We had our resident satisfaction, our family satisfaction was very, very high. But it was a very institutional style of life for the folks who lived there. We would start waking people up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning because we had to get everybody to breakfast at the same time. We would herd everybody in. That big metal cart would show up. The trays would come out with a little plastic lid over it, and that was the first introduction to whatever meal was being served that morning. And then people got herded through the day, as a group. They went to activities. They went back to their room. They went to lunch. They went to other activities. And so it was a fairly institutional lifestyle. And so we started talking about this idea of what would it look like if we lived our mission? What would it look like if we could enrich the lives of the people who live there and if we could just create an environment of love in that space? And so what we came up with was a household model for skilled nursing. Now, this was at a time, though this was, 12 years ago now, at least, that we got it built. So it was at a time when we first started talking about this that there was not a lot of the household model in existence. We went to Kansas, we looked at a model that was out there. We thought it was interesting and we started playing with it and toying around with it. And ultimately we came up with this idea that life would be better, that people could live more enriched lives if they lived in a place that looked and felt more like home. And so we came up with small households where 16 people lived together in a household, where instead of the big nurses station, kind of life revolves around the kitchen in the top right-hand corner of the screen there, and where we just try and deinstitutionalize everything about it. We just return all those decisions back to the people who live there. And so folks wake up in the morning whenever they want to wake up, and when they get up, there's staff there to help them get ready for the day. They come out to the kitchen, and the homemaker is cooking breakfast in the kitchen, and she will make whatever they want to have for breakfast that day. And that's the way they get their day started. If they want to sit out on the patio and read the newspaper with a cup of coffee before they have breakfast, that's fine. If they want to sleep in and wake up at 10:30 and come out and have brunch instead of breakfast, that's fine too. It puts the folks who live there back in control of their own lives. And so it has just been a phenomenal opportunity for us, and I could share a lot more about that. But that's a model that's now been around for a couple of years. But it really started out with this idea of how can we live our mission in that environment. So that's the first idea. The second idea is one that's a little bit counterintuitive. And when you talk about innovation, a lot of times you'll hear people say, if you're going to be innovative, you need to think outside the box, right? You got to think outside the box. Well, what happens when you think outside the box is a lot of times you come up with really lousy ideas. They might be creative, they might be innovative, but they're not grounded in reality. And so what we encourage people to do and what we encourage people to think about is to think inside the box, to recognize that we all have constraints that we have to live with, as organizations and as individuals. And the reality is that innovation happens where passion meets those constraints. And those constraints can look like any variety of different types of things, but certainly in organizations like Collington, we have regulatory constraints. We have regulations that we have to comply with. There are financial constraints. There are cultural constraints. There's time constraints, people constraints. And we could go on and on and on and list the different constraints that we have to live with. If we come up with ideas that don't work within those constraints, then it's not going to do us any good. We could come up with the most amazing idea, but if we can't afford to implement it, it's useless. And so the idea is to think inside the box and to use those constraints actually as a pivot point in order to begin to recognize new ways to accomplish things. Now, just as an example, one of the ideas that we wanted to implement at our campus in New Holland was to have more intergenerational activity. Like many retirement communities, we're fairly age segregated and we didn't have a lot of intergenerational stuff happening. And the go-to response for a retirement community is usually let's bring in a preschool. Let's get a preschool on the campus and let's make that happen. That wouldn't work for us because we had a great preschool that was right at the entrance to our campus, and there was no sense replicating that. There wasn't enough market for another one. They always had openings. They took great care of our staff's children and other kids in the community. So that really wasn't an answer. So as we got together one day, we had an off-site ideation session, and we started thinking about that. And the idea that we came up with was to do camp in the summer. And so every summer since then, this is probably 7, 8 years now, we have what we call Grands and Kids Camp. And Grands and Kids Camp is just a phenomenal time on our campus because a lot of our grandparents or great aunts and uncles will invite their grandchildren or nieces, nephews, that kind of thing, to come and live with them for a week. And then we have staff that take on camp counselor responsibilities, and we have programming and activities through the course of the day. We always carve out a little bit of time in the afternoon for kids-only activities so that the grandparents can go back home and take a nap and get rested up because the kids will wear you out. But it's just a phenomenal time. It's a lot of intentional connection between generations. And what we found through the course of that camp is that the relationships between grandchildren and grandparents are strengthened incredibly, and the wisdom and the knowledge and the experience that gets shared in that situation because they're living together and interacting together and have shared programming and those kind of things during that week. It's just incredible. And the grandkids get to know one another, and so they schedule times to come back. So they're on the campus at the same time and come back and visit Grandma and Grandpa and see each other. And there's just all kinds of great stuff that happens out of that. And it happened because we recognized we didn't have a lot of money. In fact, there's no budget for this. The grandchildren that come, they pay $30, for the week of camp. And so we have staff that volunteer time and other people that pitch in. But we had financial constraints, we had other kinds of constraints that we were dealing with, and this was a way to come up with something a little bit creative and meet that. Another example is that we are in rural Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. We are a we are a very monochromatic group. We tend to be that kind of white middle-class group of people. And so we wanted to do something to create more recognition and more appreciation for different cultures and more diversity around our area and around the world. And so we started thinking about how we could do that and what would be the best way to connect with other cultures and develop an understanding and an appreciation of those. And again, we didn't have a big budget for this, but we had a connection with Mennonite Central Committee, who works all around the world. And so in the course of discussions with them, we developed an international internship program where now we bring a young person, typically a college student, who's willing to take a year off from their studies and come and spend a year a year with us doing an internship. And we have had young people from all around the world. Again, we've been doing this for a number of years, so we've had folks from Kenya and India and Indonesia and Cambodia and Thailand and Argentina and just all around the world. We have a great young man right now from Burkina Faso who's spending a year with us. But they spend a year learning, but also contributing and sharing their culture and the life that they bring from back home. We had a great experience. The young woman in the bottom center picture, her name is Sambat. She went back home to Thailand, and after spending a year with us, just a couple of months later got married. And one of the first things she did as a young married person was jump on the plane with her husband and come back to the United States and come to Garden Spot Village to share her new husband with her family at Garden Spot. So that was just a lot of fun. She brought all her wedding dresses along. I think they do like 5 or 7 different wedding dresses, and they reenacted kind of the whole wedding ceremony for us at Garden Spot Village. So there's just amazing things that you can do, again, with very little budget if you start to make use of all the resources available and connect in unique ways. Now, one of the things I said is to think inside the box, but at the same time, you have to realize what's outside the box. You can't keep your head in the sand and ignore the rest of the world that's going on around you. And so it's really important to be aware of some of the trends that are occurring in society all around us. And those are, again, changing quickly and picking up speed, but there's some predominant trends that we need to kind of keep in touch with. And we'll talk more about some of those a little bit later, but just kind of that caveat, even though we want to think inside the box, we want to recognize our constraints, we also want to be aware of what's going on in the outside world around us that will have an influence on our future. So the next idea is, again, one of those sort of counterintuitive ones, and that's to act small, but to think big. And so what do I mean when I say that? Act small, but think big. Well, sometimes when we start to view ourselves as being big and significant and important, we tend to take very few risks because we start to think we're too big to take risks. We're too big to fail. We have too much riding on it. We're too important. There's too many people watching us. The board of directors, for Marvell, the board of directors is going to be watching his every move, and if we take risks and if there's failure that comes out of that, if we don't do something perfectly right, then that could cause some tension with the board. Or future residents, if they hear that we tried something that didn't work, really, really well, they're going to look at that and say, wow, I wonder if the wheels are falling off over at Collington. We need to, be aware of that. So if we start to take ourselves a little bit too seriously, we end up not taking any risks. And that's a really important thing that we need to be aware of. As we go forward, we can get paralyzed with aticophobia, or the fear of failure. And the fear of failure is one of those things that can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. It can look in different situations. It can appear differently. The first way that fear of failure comes up is just that. I mean, it's a fear that we're going to fail. It's what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if it's a total flop? And so we can get paralyzed in that, not willing to take the risk because we don't want to deal with the consequences of the failure. But it can also present itself as a fear of not living up to past successes. If we're an organization, if we're individuals who have always been successful, and we try something and we're not absolutely 100% sure that it's going to work perfectly, then we think, well, again, what are people going to think if we're not living up to that past success? If we try something and it doesn't fall in line with what we've done. And so we can get so cautious about that we end up not proceeding unless we're guaranteed success. And that can stifle innovation. And then the third way the fear of failure comes up is just to not admit that something has actually failed. There's that level of denial that comes into play. And, we've all probably seen that in our lives where you observe something and everybody around it knows it's failing, but the person who's in charge of it doesn't want to admit that, And so those of us who are in charge, sometimes we keep thinking, wow, If we just put a little more money into it, if we just work a little harder at it, if we just put a little more effort, if we just do this or do that, then we can get it turned around. And sometimes the best thing for it is to just admit that it failed, do the postmortem, and move on. And so, that idea that we have to be willing to fail is important. Now, that kind of flies in the face of Winston Churchill. If you remember one of his famous quotes during World War II, he was talking to the people of Great Britain, and he said, "Never, never, 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 never give up." And that's great advice if you're facing the Nazis in a world war, but it's really just not very good advice if you're trying to get involved in innovation. There's times where you have to recognize that something's not working, you have to admit failure, you have to be able to let it go and move on. But that is part of the culture of the organization that you have to foster. You have to be willing to talk about it, you have to be willing to address it and willing to deal with it. And as we look at that, one of the important things we have to do is to be willing to fail forward. We recognize, that we can get caught up in this failure thing, and it can really stifle us. Somebody told me one time that hindsight provides perspective, but regret just drags you down and beats you up. And so if you have a good, healthy sense of hindsight, if you look in the rearview mirror and you see where you've been, that's very helpful. But a rearview mirror is what? It's about this big, right? A front windshield of your car is much, much larger. And that kind of gives you a good sense of the proportion there as you think about innovation. You need to look back occasionally. You need to see where you've been, what has worked, what hasn't worked. But the real focus needs to be on moving forward, driving forward. And we can get so caught up in the stuff that happened before and in the past that it can limit us. So this idea of failing forward is just sometimes we have to recognize that something failed. We have to understand why it failed, dig into it, and then use that learning in order to propel us to move forward in the future. Now, one example of how that happened, and trust me, I could share a lot of examples from our time at Garden Spot Village and my personal time. In fact, one of the things I started talking about over the last year or so is the importance of, as leaders, the importance of building a failure resume. That we have to, if we're going to be innovative leaders, we have to be able to recognize that there's 10 or 12 things, that have just failed, sometimes epically. And this is one of those things that failed rather epically on our campus. This was a number of years ago. We had learned about this idea called senior co-housing or co-housing. Some of you may have heard about it before, but it's a model that came over from Denmark. There was an architect in California named Chuck Durrett, and Chuck had been to Denmark. He visited. He said, "This is just the greatest thing." He came over. He started a couple co-housing communities in California, and they started kind of moving out and moving into different areas of the country. There's a well-known one here in Virginia, not far away. But co-housing is kind of a self-governance model. And so the people who live there, it's very much an intentional community. The people who live there run the community and are responsible for it in a lot of different ways. But we kind of learned about it. We went, a few of us, and spent a week with Chuck and got a lot of detailed information about a co-housing community. And we came back to New Holland and we said, this could be something that would work. It would be something that would fit in many ways with our Mennonite roots. And so we started exploring that. We did some focus groups. We got positive feedback. We worked with an architect. We started to design the community. And as we were kind of coming through that, Chuck Durrett, who's the architect that I had mentioned before, called me one day and he said, "Steve," he said, "I'm going to be in Philadelphia." And he said, if your project is far enough along, he said, "I'd be willing to come to New Holland. It's only about a little over an hour away. I'd be willing to come to New Holland and I could do some public presentations on co-housing and kind of get the fire fueled a little bit for what you want to do there." So I'd heard Chuck speak many different times by that point, and he always did a phenomenal job. He was very passionate about it. And I thought, that's going to be great. So I said, we arranged it. We did some advertising for it. The day of the event came, we had about 250 people that came out to learn about co-housing. I thought, this is just what we need. This is going to get us going in just a great way. So Chuck got up. We introduced him. He started talking. It was his typical passionate appeal of why we need to live in community, why we live better when we're in community, and how co-housing provides all that. And then in the middle of his presentation, he put up this slide that I had never, ever seen him use before. And in fact, when I talked to him afterwards, he said, I don't know why he put that in there. It was just something that occurred to me like right before I went on, so I popped this slide in. And it was this slide. Yeah, you see where it's going, right? Chuck stood at the podium and he put the slide on the screen and he said, if this was you in the 60s, you're going to love co-housing. Well, if you've ever been to Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, visiting a predominantly Mennonite and Amish area, this was not them in the 60s. And this was not who they wanted to be at that point. In fact, for about the next 2 months, every time I opened my blinds or opened the door, this is what I saw right outside. It was torch and pitchfork time, and people were mad, and I got letters, and I got phone calls, and I got, these people from the community started hearing about it and calling up, and they were saying, why are you trying to bring hippies and communists to New Holland? And folks were just irate. And so understandably, we ended up killing that project and saying, well, okay, we're not going to push through on that. But we didn't just let it go at that. We spent some time debriefing. We spent some time really trying to understand what it was that went wrong with that. And we learned some really interesting things. One of the things we learned is the folks who were interested in moving in really didn't want to be involved in a community where self-governance was the model. They wanted to be involved in decision making, but they didn't want to spend all day on Monday deciding who was going to mow the grass on Thursday. They said to us, look, we've got more important things to do with this season of our life. You guys mow the grass, take care of that. We'll do the important stuff, and we'll do what's meaningful and what gives us purpose. And so that was an important learning. One of the things they loved about it was the style of the homes and the small community layout. And so what we ended up doing was taking that and developing these two small neighborhoods. And so you can see, let me advance one slide. This is what the neighborhoods look like. It's about 12 or 14 homes that are situated around a common green space, heavily landscaped green space. There's what we call a commons house up at the right end there, and that's sort of like the clubhouse for the folks who live in that neighborhood. They can use that for potluck suppers or to watch Monday Night Football or book club or whatever they want to do. And the idea is to create these homes that have great, very gracious front porches where people are connected with their neighbors. They're tight together, so it's fairly dense, and it's all built around this idea of relationship that came out of the co-housing story. And it's not at all dissimilar from the design that we had developed for co-housing. And so this idea of putting that together, we would kind of function as we have at our retirement community in the past in terms of entrance fee model and governance model and all those kind of things, but it would give people an opportunity to enjoy what they were looking forward to the most, which was the relationships and the connections with other people. And so we developed that. We're in the process of building that now and started pre-sales. They've gone very, very well. So we're really, really thrilled to see how that develops and continues to move forward. Next idea is one that has come to me over the last couple of years, and that's if we're going to be creative, if we're going to be innovative, we have to be curators. So you have to curate in order to create is the idea here. And one of the things I tell people is probably one of the best tools for innovation, again, like that one of those first pictures, we all have in our pocket. It's a smartphone. And so as you're out and about, and we tell our staff and our team members and residents, as you're out and about, whether you're on vacation, whether you're out for dinner, whether you're at a conference, whatever it is, if you see something that inspires you, if you see something that piques your curiosity, if you see something that speaks to your soul, whatever it is, just take pictures of it. Take pictures of it and bring it back. And so we spend some time with those pictures, just sort of curating themes and coming up with ideas. And that helps us to come up with ways that we can develop new innovations or new services or new programs or those kind of things that are also connected with what's going on, the trends that are going on in the world around us. So here's an example of that. I was out for lunch. My daughter was studying at college in Philadelphia, and she took us to this little farm-to-fork restaurant called Honeygrow. And they do stir-fry and salads and smoothies and a few other things. And it's very much a farm-to-fork inspired model, so they get locally produced fresh food. Just a neat little restaurant. But one of the things that made it unique is that they use this kiosk system in order to place all the orders. So you didn't go in and talk to a person and place your order, but you went in and you stood in line, and then you got to a kiosk and you would just put in your order on the kiosk. And when I talked to the owners, I followed up and talked to the owners of the restaurants, and they have 4 or 5 of those now. They said that they were able to save 1 full-time equivalent or 1 full-time employee per store by using these kiosks and using that technology in order to fulfill that role within the restaurant. So you put in your order, you can pay for it right there with your credit card. The order goes back to the cook. He makes your stir fry exactly the way you want it, because as you see on the right-hand side of the screen, you can customize all the ingredients and make it just the way you want it, which was another idea we thought was very interesting. And then you get a great freshly prepared meal with freshly harvested food. So it's kind of that win-win. So we brought back, and I'll show you how we played that out at Garden Spot Village in a couple of minutes. Another idea that developed was, had its roots in this boutique hotel down in Dallas, Texas. A few of us were down for a conference, and we were walking by, and we noticed all these people in this hotel lobby, and they had this great little coffee shop, and so we went in to see what was going on. And one of the things we noticed, which was different from most hotel lobbies, it wasn't big, but it was just packed full of people, and everybody was sitting in these small seating groups. So there was tables with chairs around them. There was just different couches and small seating groups. They had a little library, but all through the hotel lobby were these different style seating groups for larger groups and smaller groups. And every seat was full, and people were standing there, and there was this buzz in the air. And so again, as we talked to the hotel manager, he told us, he said, most of these people aren't even our guests. They just come off the street. They're drawn in by this coffee shop because they have this unique, on the right-hand side, this unique Japanese cold brew coffee system that looks like a chemistry set, or a still, some people say. And they have great coffee, and so people just kind of settle in, and they come with people they know, or they come and meet people they don't know yet, and it's this really neat sense of community that exists there. And so we thought, well, that's an interesting idea, because that's one of the things we want to have even more so at Garden Spot Village. We want to have that connection. We want to have those opportunities for relationships to develop. And so we brought that back, and we had a kind of a center atrium area in our community. And I should probably have some before pictures before we did the renovation, because it was fairly sterile. It was the flat white walls. It had a big planter in the center. There was no place to sit and visit with other people. And because of that, it really formed a crossroads. And so we came back in and did a renovation. And this was the project that we worked on with RLPS Architects. And we wanted to do a couple different things. We wanted to make it look and feel more like Lancaster County than just a generic retirement community or generic atrium that could have been in any place around the country. But more importantly, we wanted to create a place for relationships to develop. We wanted to create opportunities for community to flourish. And so you can see in the very center, we put a bunch of seating groups. At that location, we put in a coffee shop right in the front, right in the center of the atrium space there. You can see on the corner of the coffee bar is one of those Japanese cold brew coffee systems that is real popular. And frankly, it's as much art as it is coffee service, and it's a discussion starter. So people come in, and they'll walk up and look at it, and somebody else sitting there will strike up a conversation, and so relationships develop. We serve Starbucks at that location, so we have all the Starbucks lines of beverages that they offer, and so the result of that has been that not only are our residents utilizing that and buying Starbucks, and our staff, but we have people coming in off the street. And again, we're right on the edge of a very small town in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. So people have to drive to get there, but people drive in, they park, they come in and get Starbucks. We have lots of moms will go out for their morning walk, and they'll stop on the way, and so you'll see 3 or 4 strollers gathered together with toddlers or babies, and the moms are there, and then it's an opportunity for all the grandmas to gather around and ooh and ah over the babies. But relationships have developed with that. We have business people who come in and have their meetings there over coffee. We have our local police will stop in and get a cup of coffee. We've just got all this very rich sense of community life that occurs. We have high school kids who on their way home from high school will stop in and get Starbucks and kind of hang out there and visit. So it's just one of those really great experiences that has added a whole lot of life, and it's drawn out of that little boutique hotel. But again, lots of the tables and chairs and seating areas and small clusters of people that are almost always full at this point. So that came out of that idea of curating in order to create. The next idea I want to share is one that comes from this great little book. If you've never read it and you have grandkids who are coming out of college, it's a great book to start life with. It's really inspirational. And frankly, I go back and read it periodically myself because I find it really inspiring. And it's called Steal Like an Artist. And the idea for me, I am not an overly creative person. And so I always felt like in life I just could never be innovative. But the idea with this book is that there are no genuinely creative ideas anymore. That all the ideas are just building on other ideas that have gone before us. And it picks up this quote from Pablo Picasso, the idea that nothing's original. It picks up this quote from Picasso. It says, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." And what he means by that is that you don't just copy, because there's always a tendency to do that. You see something that's great and you want to kind of replicate it exactly the way it is. It's this copy and paste mentality that we kind of fall into. But the idea in the book is to not adopt that copy and paste, but still steal the idea. So you steal the idea, you own the idea, you think about it, you ruminate on it, you break it down into the individual elements and start to mix and match those deconstructed elements. You put the parts together in new ways, and before you know it, you come up with something that's totally unique and totally yours, fits with your culture, fits with your organization, fits with who you are, but is still a very innovative process. You want to create those experiences that you want people to have out of that. And so, again, everything is a remix. Everything in life that's come. In fact, if you go back and you study art history, you can see the previous, influences coming from other artists as they've come through the generations. And so that's just the reality for all of us. And for me, that's kind of inspiring to know that I don't have to come up with something totally unique. I can take other neat ideas that I find and put them together in new and different ways. So one way that we did that at Garden Spot is we were talking about a couple of really different things one day. And we were talking about our advertising and how we were going to promote brand awareness at Garden Spot Village. And then later on in the conversation, we were talking about bucket lists, and somebody was talking about bucket lists. And how could we create opportunities for the people who live at Garden Spot to fulfill their bucket list? And so we ended up doing sort of a mashup or a remix of those two ideas. And we put a billboard together with a typical bucket list item and came up with a hot air balloon. So we now have a Garden Spot Village hot air balloon, and it gives our residents an opportunity to take a ride over Lancaster County and get to see Lancaster County from a different perspective. A lot of us have always wanted to ride in a hot air balloon, but maybe never got the opportunity. And they can give tickets or give rides to children or grandchildren as gifts, and so it's just a really neat opportunity. But it's also serves for brand awareness because we've got our logo on there and we promote Garden Spot Village. But it's so much better than a billboard. In fact, it costs a fraction of what a billboard costs. And we have people all the time who chase the balloon, take pictures of it, email them back to us. People who have no connection with our community are emailing us pictures, taking pictures, and sending those back to us.
All we have to do is get it ours in the same picture as the president on Air Force One.
There you go, exactly. So, and all that really is just that kind of mashup of two very different ideas and putting them together in a unique way. We're going to see, we're having some problems with the technology. No, we're not going to get there. There is a great little video called Where Good Ideas Come From. If you want to Google that sometime, just Google Where Great Ideas Come From. And it's a short little 4-minute video that talks about a book that this guy developed. And the idea with his book is that good ideas don't happen all at once. You know, we talk about epiphanies, but epiphanies usually don't happen in an instant. What happens, rather, are what he calls slow hunches. Slow hunches are those things where you pick up an idea here, and then you add something onto it there, and then you pick up a little bit more later on. And over the course of time, with discussions with many, many people, you come upon this idea. But a great idea usually is years in the making. And so it kind of takes the pressure off. You don't have to come up with something immediately phenomenally great, but you can let these slow hunches sort of develop. So for us, one of these slow hunches started with tomatoes. And in our dining area at Garden Spot Village, we have a great salad bar. And in the summertime, we have amazing tomatoes because we are in farm country in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. In fact, we're really focused on that farm to fork concept. We have a van that we bought several years ago, and it goes out in the summer and makes rounds at several different farms and picks up fresh produce and brings it back. So as you can imagine, in the summertime, our tomatoes just look phenomenal. But come February, what happens is the tomatoes on the salad bar look a lot more like this. And so, you know, over the years, we've had people, you know, say to us, why can't we get a good tomato in February? Why can't we do that? You know, with all the things that are going on in the world, why can't we manage to get a good, ripe, tasty tomato in the winter? And so that was the beginning of that slow hunch. Now, I talked about the farm to fork concept. That's something that we're heavily invested on. We believe that local is the new organic, that organic is good, but organic is a little confusing for a lot of people. But if you have locally produced food, locally produced vegetables, then that has a certain appeal to it. And so we adopted that idea as well. And that all sort of flowed into this slow hunch that we developed. And then a number of years ago, I was in Zambia, and we went over, my family and I did, to do a short-term missions project with AIDS orphans. And the group that we were with encouraged us to get into the country a few days early to get acclimated to the time zone and all that sort of thing. And so they had us stay at this resort right on the edge of Victoria Falls. And while I was there, we went into one of the restaurants at the resort one day, and I was looking at the salad bar that they had, and it was the most amazing salad bar I'd ever seen. They had fruits and vegetables and things on there I had never even seen before. So I was kind of standing there oohing and on, and I went and found the restaurant manager, and I was talking to him about, you know, where do you get all this, where do you source all of this stuff at? And he said, well, interestingly enough, a year or two before, they had started their own greenhouse project. And so they grow a lot of their own produce for their restaurants, but at the same time, they're able to hire a large group of blind people who live in that Livingstone area of Zambia. And for whatever reason, he said, I'm not sure what it is, but we seem to have a lot of blind people here. And in Zambia, there's no Social Security, safety net, no Medicaid, you know, those kind of things. And so those folks, if they don't have a job, are left to beg for their living. And so they were able to hire a large group of those folks to work in the greenhouse. And it turned out to be this great win-win. So I came back and started putting all that together. Tomatoes, locally produced, greenhouse, it all seemed to fit really, really well. But we didn't want to do just your typical ordinary greenhouse because we had a lot of those. And I started looking at the greenhouse that Epcot developed, an aeroponic greenhouse. And many of you have probably been there, seen that, have ridden through. And it just is, they position it as the future of farming. And so we started looking at that. And in the course of my investigation, I found out that the guy who had developed that aeroponic technology had gone out on his own and was selling aeroponic greenhouses. So I got in touch with him. We started working on a proposal to build an aeroponic greenhouse at Garden Spot Village. And what happened was he called me back at one point and he said, well, Steve, he said, I have to tell you, I'm in the process of selling the company. And so why don't you just wait? You can deal with the new owners and they'll get you all set up. So we waited for a little bit. The transaction occurred. We tried to get in touch with the new owners. They were less than helpful. And it turns out they only wanted one small portion of his technology. And so they bought the company, broke it up in parts, and sold it off. Well, that began a long process of trying to find out where in the world did the commercial division of this get to. And so through one of those providential equations, it turned out that the guy who had bought the commercial application of this aeroponic Epcot technology was an Amish fella that lived literally 4 miles away from our campus. Couldn't have been better. So I went down to visit Sam Stoltzfus, and I started talking with him, and I said, Sam, I've been wanting to do this for several years now. I told him my whole story. I said, we got to do this at Garden Spot Village. And Sam looked at me and he said, well, Steve, he said, I'm just not sure I can sell it to you yet. And I said, Sam, what are you talking about? This is your business. You know, your business has to sell stuff. So you probably should rethink your business model. And Sam said, no. He said, we will eventually. He said, but this Epcot technology, he said, it's pretty good. He said, but if you can give me a little time, I think I can make it a lot better. So over the next probably 2 years, Sam and I would check in periodically. He went through 18 different iterations of the aeroponic technology from Epcot Center. He decreased the initial cost, he decreased the life cycle cost, he increased the yield per square foot, increased the reliability, just transformed it phenomenally from what it was to what it is now. And a few months ago, we built an aeroponic greenhouse on our campus at Garden Spot Village. Each of those towers that you see has 72 plants in it. And so each little pod has 8 towers. So you start to do the math and multiply it out. And we are now growing a phenomenal amount of produce on our campus that's not only local, it's ultra local. And it's organic, and we serve it in our dining rooms. The great part about this is it not only hits on that healthy eating idea, you get all the nutrients in fresh organic produce, but it also is good for the environment because the average head of lettuce, according to I think it's Iowa State University, travels over 1,700 miles to get from where it's grown to where it's served. And so ours doesn't travel 1,700 yards. I mean, it is just right there. So we've had a lot of fun with that. We've grown everything from multiple different kinds of lettuce to kale to bok choy to snow peas and snap peas and lima beans and tomatoes and squash and cucumbers and peppers and all kinds of herbs, and all that sort of stuff is growing in our greenhouse right now. And that's all really, really cool. The other part that makes it excellent, again, going back to that idea that started in Zambia, is because of the way this is designed and built, we're able to hire people from a local vocational services program who have intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities and aren't able to get jobs otherwise. So we employ a group of people to staff this, and they do something good for us, and we provide employment for them, which improves, obviously, the quality of their living as well. So one of those win-wins that was very much the slow hunch. So you can see some of the different items that we have at the greenhouse. It's just really cool. So then one of the other lessons we've learned is that we live in a post-demographic society. There was a time, and it wasn't very long ago, that market analysts would do a lot of research, and they would determine based on people's age or sex or nationality or other kind of things, what their preferences were. And they were pretty good at it. You know, if you were a certain age group, you know, certain nationality or gender or whatever, they could sort of target right in. The reality is, though, that today that has all started to come undone, that people of all ages like the same things, people of different nationalities like the same things, and that people are beginning to construct their own identities more freely than ever before. We live in a society that is very fluid these days, that ideas are available, the cost of trying new things is low, the markets are very efficient, and so if you try something and you don't like it, you don't have a huge investment in it. So what we see is people sort of breaking beyond those demographic studies. So, you know, before we'd say, well, baby boomers like this, but Gen X likes that. You know, and today you start to see the overlap that's kind of coming on. So coming out of that, we realize it's more important than ever before to study trends. And so one of the areas that we did this with at Garden Spot Village was looking at our dining program. A few years ago, we had a really institutional style dining program. We had the cafeteria set up. You would get a tray, you'd set it on the little metal rail, you'd slide it down. The lady behind the counter would dip the food out of the steam well on a plate, hand it to you, and you'd go on your way. And so we started looking at that and recognizing that people expected more, you know, that people had different dining palates. How many times do you hear people talking about being foodies these days? And people want a great dining experience when they come. And so we started looking at a variety of trends. Healthy cooking, we've already talked about that and how important that is. And more people are adopting a healthy eating lifestyle. And others of us make it more aspirational, perhaps, but it's something that's important to all of us. Global foods is another one that's important. Even in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, people want to try the foods from all over the world. You know, we all watch the Food Channel and we see these different food influences coming in, and so there's a curiosity to that. We want to try it. People have traveled more frequently now than they did 20 years ago, and so we want to try and experience those foods that we have had. People want their food to be personalized and customized because at the end of the day, food is seen as another form of self-expression. And so people want to be able to have something that reflects their own identity and who they are and their individuality, even in their meal. We talk about that in residences, making sure that apartments and cottages and other kinds of places can be customized, but it's even reached the point that meals have to be customized as well because people want to express who they are. So one of the ways that a lot of organizations are choosing to meet a number of those different trends is this fast casual trend that has come along. And a lot of those brands are pretty familiar to many of you. They cook fresh, it's made to order, and you can customize what you want to have in it. And a lot of them are focused on healthier eating, some not so healthy. But it's that blend that's available that gives people lots of choices and allows them to customize things. One of my favorites of those is a restaurant that I found just not too long ago in the Pittsburgh area called Burgatory. It's the logo down on the bottom center. And at Burgatory you go in and obviously they serve burgers and shakes and some salads and things like that. But they have 8 different types of hamburger that you can choose from. They have 6 different buns, 8 different rubs, 10 different cheeses, 12 different sauces, and 30 different toppings. So you can sit down and instead of a menu, you have a clipboard, and you can put together a hamburger that completely represents who you are as a person. And so people just love that. And you can play with different combinations and try new experiences. But that's the idea. That's what people are looking for these days. They recognize that food needs to be an adventure. And when they come into a place to eat, they want the design of that space to be inspired. It's real important that we not just have that plain vanilla cafeteria any longer. So I was reading a while ago some stuff by a restaurateur out of New York City named Danny Meyer. He's got a lot of real famous restaurants around the New York area. And he said something interesting. He said that restaurants have to do 3 things really well in order to succeed. They have to cook the food, they have to do the dishes. First 2 are pretty unimpressive. But he said the third one is that you have to provide an experience that's transporting. that makes you feel at home on the one hand, but takes you to another place, takes you to somewhere else and somewhere special on the other hand. It's a place that has to have a story to tell, and it has to make you a part of that story. And I thought that was really interesting. And so we started looking at our dining area and our dining program and recognized that we needed to do a lot around that to improve it. And we wanted to create a space that was truly inspired. And ultimately, we wanted to write the book that we wanted to read. Instead of just relying on the market experts, we wanted to do something unique and something that would appeal to a lot of people. So we developed what we call the Harvest Table Restaurant at Garden Spot Village. And you can see, again, we worked with Lancaster County themes. There's brick on the wall. There's that faded, painted sign going down the hallway there that announces that you've arrived at the Harvest Table, reminiscent of the tobacco warehouses around Lancaster County. And the artwork that we chose to use was homed canned goods. So I literally drove a van full of canning jars to an Amish lady's house down the road from us, and she spent the winter canning, doing all different kinds of stuff, and so we feature her canned goods as the artwork in the space. And it just creates a very much a unique environment there as you go through. This is kind of a look at the restaurant space, the dining spaces. We came up with lots of small seating areas, and we broke through a lot of the stereotypes. Architects will typically tell you, well, you're senior living, you don't want to do this, or you're senior living, we don't want to do that. And so one of those things was booths. We have a lot of booths in that space, and our residents tell us that by having booths, they feel like they can have more private conversations, that there's not somebody else listening in to their conversation. We have on the right-hand side, you can see those big orange chairs. There's a big community table where people who come in by themselves can sit down at that table, and then another person joins them, and another person joins them. And every day, both at noon and at supper time, that big table becomes kind of the center of the party that occurs at Garden Spot Village. And then the dining, we have multiple different stations. It's all fresh. It's all food that we have prepared. We have a big commercial wok in the back corner there where we bust out stir fries that are made with the produce that we grow over in the greenhouse now. It comes over fresh, and so we can have that healthy, fresh stir fry that people can choose from. There's a great brick hearth oven for pizzas and casseroles and things, a grill. We do a lot of fresh fish and all those kind of things. But it's all that inspiration that comes, again, one of those slow hunches from looking at trends and learning about different models that are out there and available. And then the next thing, just real quickly, a learning that we had is that culture is really critical. And you all know this. The culture that you share is something that's very, very important. And so we have to shape that. We have to use that. And it's important to develop a culture of innovation. We have to be willing to take risks. We have to be flexible. We have to be tolerant when things don't go exactly the way we want them to go. And that's an important part of creating an innovative organization that other people will look at and say, they've got something interesting going on over there. And so part of our job is to awaken the possibility that we have. And again, part of the culture that we have tried to develop is to break through some of those stereotypes about what it means to be and to live at a retirement community. And so we do some really fun, kind of interesting things. We team up with Mennonite Disaster Services and build homes for people who have lost their homes due to hurricanes or tornadoes or other kinds of things. We build those in wall panels on our campus. And so we'll take a Saturday and we'll team up with maybe a local church and we'll put these wall panels together. They all get loaded on a truck and then shipped to another part of the country where the home is to be built. And then we'll either put people in a van for the next 8 weeks or put them on a plane and send them down to finish building. So staff and team members and residents work together on that, along with folks from a local church that we'll partner with, and we get a chance to do that together. My favorite photo, probably in my time, is the lady on the right, Elizabeth, who we refer to as our Mennonite Mother Teresa. Just an incredible woman of wisdom and passion. But she was 101 years old out there pounding nails. So just a great story there. We have missions trips that go out from Garden Spot Village. We've developed a relationship with a group of churches in Honduras outside of Tegucigalpa. And so every summer we send a team of folks down there, mostly residents, and typically a couple of staff people who go down and serve in Honduras. We do a big biking event every year to help support farmland preservation efforts around Lancaster County. We'll get about 1,200 bicyclists that come onto the campus and then begin a bike tour around Lancaster County, starting and ending on our campus. We have a marathon that we put on every year, 26.2 miles through the Lancaster County farmland. We have residents who volunteer and help support that. We've had residents who have run both the half and the full marathon, and just have some great experiences and great ways to sort of break out of the stereotypes that we typically find ourselves in. We added a kids marathon a couple of years ago, which is just a great way to promote healthy lifestyles for younger kids. They take the month or two before the marathon, do 25 miles, and then come to the campus and finish their last 1.2 miles together. And so residents gather, we have cowbells, we cheer, we wave, they get medals and t-shirts and all that other fun stuff. The same as the big folks in the marathon the next day. So that idea that focus on your culture as a way to innovate and be willing to receive constant change as a way to deal with that is really critical and important. And then the last thing I want to share real quickly is just around appreciative inquiry. And that's a process to just look at the positives. You know, sometimes we get so down on ourselves, we pick apart the things that we don't do particularly well, and we invest a lot of time and energy into those things. And actually, if we spend more time celebrating what we do well, celebrating the great things about our culture on our campus, celebrating the positives that we had, and continuing to allow those to flourish and grow even better, we are much, much better off. And so I am just a huge fan of appreciative inquiry and putting most of our resources into expanding what we do well at, expanding what we're passionate about, and expanding what we have vision around. So really, really critical element there. One example of that real quickly is a coaching model that we developed. We have very much a person-centered model. We have worked in our households in skilled nursing and personal care and around the campus in being very person-centered. And we try to do that with our team members as well. And so one of the things we kept bumping up against was the annual performance appraisal. That was a time of year where our staff didn't feel like it was a very person-centered environment. They felt scrutinized, they felt critiqued, as many of us did when we had job reviews. And so we completely eliminated performance appraisals and developed a coaching model. So we trained about 90 of our team members to be coaches, and now they work with small groups of people throughout the year, coaching them, having conversations. Instead of, you didn't do this very well last week, the conversations are more about, what's your passion? What's your heart? What skills and gifts do you bring to work every day that you would like to unleash at Garden Spot Village and use those to serve people well and to enrich lives? And so that has been just a lot of fun to see that develop and grow. And I could spend a lot of time talking about that as well. But it's important that we continue to generate these new ideas and continue to generate new opportunities because the reality is that every innovation has an expiration date. That thing that seems so new and fresh and different one day, a few days later starts to feel not quite so fresh anymore. So we have to continue to focus on that. Again, that culture of innovation is really critical in order to drive that. So my last word to all of you before we spend some time with some questions is just to try new things, go new places, use new tools, and meet new faces. And out of all of that, you'll find some really exciting, innovative opportunities. So thank you. We do have a few minutes, I think, if there's questions. We'd be glad to entertain those questions, thoughts, observations, critiques.
Really, an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. I guess I wanted to focus you a little on the activism thing. And obviously you, particularly at the end there, talked about some kind of ways of creating a culture of activism where people aren't just making our own lives better, but hopefully making the rest of the world better, and that those are ultimately indivisible. I wondered if you could talk a little about how you created that culture,
Yeah.
where it could go, and if I could just add to that, I guess it's also, yes, a culture of innovation, but what do you actually do so people aren't scared?
Uh-huh. Yeah, two great questions. First one is how do you create that culture of activism or that focus? At Garden Spot Village, when I arrived there 15 years ago, we had a pretty ugly culture that existed. There was a lot of tension between administration and the residents who lived there. There was a lot of suspicion. There was not good communication. And so we began to work on that culture thing really quickly. Transparency was critical to that, and some other tools that we used. But in the midst of that, we realized that one of the most important things that people were striving for was to live with a sense of purpose at this season of life. So many times the stereotypical approach to a retirement community is, you kind of go, you sit on the rocking chair and you just wait for the days to pass. And instead, people are yearning to live with a sense of purpose, to continue to make a difference in the world around them. And so we just frankly started listening. What are the opportunities? What are the ways? Our job as team members is not to create those opportunities, but to just facilitate those. So we listen for opportunity. The missions trips that people go on to serve in other countries, that was initiated by residents. The building houses came out of a concern from residents that after a hurricane a number of years ago, isn't there something that we can do? And just writing a check doesn't seem like that's enough. So we have residents who go out into the public schools and do tutoring programs. We have residents that are mentoring young people. So some of it's fairly localized activism, making a difference in the lives of just a few people. And then we have residents that are involved in statewide politics and involved on the Governor's Council for Aging. We have residents that are involved in environmental issues. The Chesapeake Bay watershed restoration is a big deal around us. And so we have a group of residents that is led by a former chemistry professor at Villanova, and they go out through the county and collect stream water samples and bring it back. They have a lab set up at Garden Spot. They analyze those stream water samples and then send the results in as part of the bay restoration effort. So it's really just creating that vision that now's not the time to sit back. Now's the time to let other people do the mundane chores so that you can begin to make a difference in the world, that you can live with purpose, that you can live with meaning, that you can live with vitality. And we have seen that even in our healthcare areas. We have a group of folks in our personal care community or assisted living community that was fairly artistic, and so they had a design club that they had put together. And they were working on this tea bag folding technique. It's kind of like origami, only flat. And so they, through a really neat series of circumstances, they got connected with a group of women in Bangladesh. And these women in Bangladesh made handmade paper to support their families. But the revenues from the paper alone weren't really supporting them any longer. They needed to come up with some products to make out of their paper. So our folks at Garden Spot in our assisted living area got a quantity of their paper, their handmade paper, and set about designing some different products. So they put together a line of greeting cards and Christmas cards, and then got on Skype and taught them the folding techniques in order to create those. And almost 2 years ago now, those Christmas cards started arriving in 10,000 Villages stores all around the United States. And those women in Bangladesh are now able to support their families because a group of people in an assisted living community in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, didn't believe that life was over. They believed they still had something to contribute, still had an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of other people. So that's the biggest part of it, is just to recognize your wisdom and your experience, and that you can use that to make a difference in the lives of others. I get excited about this. I'm sorry. I spent I spent a few days a couple of years ago with a Native American gentleman from Canada, and he does restorative justice work with the First Nations people in Canada. And so I was really interested in that culture because I had always heard, I had always read that the Native American First Nation peoples held their elders in much higher esteem than we did in our kind of Caucasian middle-class white circles. And so we started talking about that, and I was just peppering him with questions. And so at one point he stopped me and he said, well, Steve, you need to understand something. He said, first of all, not all of our older people are elders. He said, some of our folks just get old and cranky the same way that some of your people do. He said, the people that we hold up as elders are the people who have harvested the wisdom from their lives and are using that to invest in the next generation. And so we brought that back and we started to look at what are ways that we can invest in the next generation and do more intergenerational connectivity and create opportunities to pass that wisdom along. And here's the fascinating thing as we've started to do that is that next generation or a couple generations down, they are yearning for someone to invest in them. They are yearning for someone to mentor them, to take an interest in them, and to share some wisdom with them. Oftentimes what we find is their parents are so busy making a living, so busy working on their careers, so busy with other kinds of things, that there's not that investment in the next generation. So that's a role that as we age, we can play in a phenomenal way. Get involved with local youth mentoring programs, get involved in the public schools and other kinds of things. There's great opportunities. Yes, sorry, that was a really long question. I won't take the next ones that long, but go ahead.
I'm interested in the failure of the co-housing idea.
Mm-hmm.
Do you attribute that primarily to some unique demographic circumstances in your location, or is it, do you think it's more fundamentally flawed?
Yeah, great question. There's a couple different elements that come to play in that, I believe. One of that is certainly the way it was presented to our conservative Lancaster County constituency. That certainly played a part in it. Through the course of that presentation, it didn't work. After that, though, I started talking to people who had lived in intentional communities, not necessarily co-housing, but there's a variety of different intentional communities that function very much using that model. And found two very distinct camps. There were absolutely people who love it, who are passionate about it, who will live there the rest of their lives. They just believe in it completely. That tends to be a fairly small group, but there needs to be those opportunities for people who want to live in that environment. That self-governance model, that intentional community model is very critical and important to how they want to live. There were a lot of other people I met, though, who had lived in intentional communities and left. And when I talked to them about why they left, it always came back to the same thing. They said, you know, we love the relationships. There was a deep relational aspect of life in that community that we absolutely loved and we miss. But we would spend all our free time dealing with meetings and the governance stuff. The one guy said, we would literally spend 2 evenings a week talking about who was going to mow the grass on Thursday. And finally I'd say, for crying out loud, I'll mow the grass. You know, just let's not talk about that anymore. You know, how meals were going to get prepared, who was going to take care of, you know, the flower garden, you know, how are we going to handle that situation? This person put a flag up that we don't agree with, or a, you know, political poster, how do we, and it just blossomed into just this bureaucracy as opposed to relationality. So some folks love that, other people not so much. And I think the common element in all of that is that we are hardwired to live in community. We're hardwired with this yearning for a relationship. And so if we can tap into that, we can live that out and play that out in a variety of different settings that meet a lot of different needs. Yes? Don't stand up, that's fine. I sure can.
I'd be interested in knowing what the process you use within your community to develop the ideas, the innovations,
Great question. For a lot of years, it has been fairly fluid in terms of structure. We try to provide lots of opportunities to listen to ideas that are being generated, critiques that are being made, that sort of thing. I do something I call coffee and conversation at our community every other week. So we will meet in a room much like this, and we'll get between 80 and 100 people will come. Whoever wants to come can come, and we talk about whatever they want to talk about for an hour. So we have coffee, we talk, and we will answer any question they have. We will entertain any suggestions that come up from the people who live there, and we'll engage with that. So there have been some great things that have come out of that, and some great improvements to life in our community that have come out of that. In the last couple of years, we've gotten a little more intentional, and so we do what we call ideation sessions, where we will invite a group of people to come, and we sit down and we have a structured process to work on a particular thing. So a couple of months ago, we got together and we wanted to spend some time creating new avenues for people to live with purpose, because that's something that we talk a lot about. And so we said, we came and we put a question on the screen that was kind of the central focus for that afternoon of how do we create new opportunities for people to live with purpose and meaning at this season of their life. And so we had some structured process we worked through, and out of that we came up with some really neat ideas. So about 3 weeks ago we had a volunteer fair. And so we had a large room all set up, and all different kinds of volunteer opportunities and efforts on our campus and beyond our campus were represented there. So residents could come through, and future folks that will be moving onto our campus, and they could get connected with the different volunteer opportunities around our larger community, so that they could plug in and make a difference in a unique way. Because we've got about 1,000 folks live on our campus from all different backgrounds, all different experiences, and so we want to be able to provide them with the venue that's just going to be perfect for them to live well. So here in the front.
It appears to me that a lot of the innovation, the interesting things you're doing, both come from the Mennonite tradition and the resources you have. For example, Mennonite World Service and other things. It appears to me a lot of that is based in the Mennonite connection, both in sourcing, resources, all the way up it. Sure. How much of that is available if we're an Episcopal life community, but in theory we're connected with the Quakers, but not much. There's
Sure.
About 14 people come to Quaker meeting here.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, okay, that's the box. What's the limitations? What limitations does that give you? It gives you a lot of opportunities, a lot of resources. What limitations does that give you?
Yeah, great question. We use those Mennonite connections because those are the most readily available to us. If we had a different denominational affiliation, we would probably look to what resources they have available. Only because there's a relationship that already exists there, and it's easier to tap somebody on the shoulder if that relationship already exists. So that's one. Interestingly enough, we're a Mennonite retirement community in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. We have less than 20% of the people who live there are Mennonite. So the vast majority of our folks are not Mennonite. But we're able to use kind of that Mennonite culture and heritage and those Mennonite connections to further things that are important to everyone. So the mission trips that we do in Honduras are actually connected with a Baptist organization. One of our residents was the director of Latin American missions for a Baptist group. So we had a connection there, so we tapped into that connection. We've got other relationships in the local community through the schools, through other kinds of venues that we use. We will try and exploit any relationship that we have or can develop if it will make a difference in the lives of our folks or make a difference in the lives of other people around the world. So that's the one aspect. In terms of limitations, there are certainly those, and I think one of the things that we have remained very vigilant on is to live within our core values and our mission statement. We have a set of core values. We have a mission statement that is Christ-centered. Certainly, there are other opportunities that would be presented that might conflict with that, and we just opt not to do that. Doesn't mean they're not great efforts. It just means that it doesn't necessarily fit with who we are. But that's part of our culture. I think part of every community's culture is you have to determine what's important to you. What are the non-negotiables about who you are and what you want to be about in the world? And what are the things that you won't do? In Lancaster County, we have a lot of piles of road apples around. So we talk about what don't we want to step in when we're on our journey together, and what do we feel free to explore. And that comes out of our culture, but clearly there are some parameters on that might not be evident in other organizations, and that's okay.
Just a brief comment and then a question. Quakers have many of the same connections and work with Mennonites quite often.
Absolutely.
Kendall could, if they wanted, give us exactly the same opportunities for service overseas, international contacts, and so on. If we want that, it's available. But this one is for Marvell. I was very impressed with the pictures of the dining room. I have heard many negative comments about the design, interior decor, color schemes, etc. for our new eating venue. Is it too late to change interior designers? Can we do better? Well, then send them back to the drawing board.
And if I could jump in real quick, if you don't mind me.
Give a good perspective on this.
If you don't, our folks love our dining area now. When we first presented it, the most prevalent question was, what kind of an idiot put that together? Who would do that? Who would put brick on the wall inside a building? That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. Who picked out that carpet? They wouldn't put that carpet in a casino. It's so gaudy. So every step through the renovation process, our folks absolutely hated it. My phone rang off the hook. We had a lot of those same criticisms. The colors are too bright. We don't like those bright colors. Who picked orange for those chairs? That's not going to work. I hate orange. So we went through a lot of that kind of stuff. Interestingly enough, when it was all done, when the temporary walls came down and people got to walk in and experience the whole space as it was intended to be, as the designers envisioned it, they went, that's okay. In fact, the night after the harvest table opened, I was leaving. It was probably 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. I was walking down the hallway, and a couple of ladies pulled me over, and they said, Steve, we are so lucky to have you as our CEO, to come up with all of this for us. It is just you are the most amazing person. And I went home that night, and I told my wife, and this is a quote, I said to her, you know what? I said, I just went from being an absolute idiot to a genius in just a matter of a couple hours. And I'm going to enjoy it this evening, because by tomorrow morning, I'm going to be an idiot again. And I know that. And that's just the way life is. And change is hard, change is difficult. And getting back to one of the previous questions that I failed to come back to, how do we deal with that, and how do we approach change in a way that it's not so hard? And I think the best way to do that is constant incremental change. Sometimes we wait so long, we put all of our eggs in one basket, one big change, and it just throws everybody off kilter. If we have a constant stream of change that's occurring in different ways, then it can keep us used to that and keep us tuned in to some of those innovative efforts. We just renovated another hallway, kind of going down in another main space in our building, and we did a lot of those similar bright oranges and blues and reds on the wall. And my phone didn't ring at all this time. And so I was talking to a group of our folks, and I said, this is the first time we've ever put paint on the wall and carpet on the floor, and my phone didn't ring. What happened? And the response was funny. They said, well, you finally used color. So I said, okay, we'll go with that. But it's just kind of keeping up with it and constantly experiencing change. It keeps us used to it. There's one more question, yes.
Okay. In talking about people, some people grow grumpy. Often it's our bodies that grow grumpy. And it doesn't happen overnight. In some cases it does, from a fall or whatever. But
Yeah.
what models are you using and thinking about for assisted living for people who would already in this, I assume you have an assisted living part of your health center, and people who are not quite there but are clearly headed there?
Sure.
And what have you thought of in that direction?
Yeah, absolutely. The reality is that we are aging and that our bodies give us kind of some fits along the way. There are aches and pains that go along with that. There are medical diagnoses that go along with that. And I think there's two elements to that. One is a mindset issue. We can take on a medical mindset where we get so focused on our aches and pains and so focused on our diagnoses that we become very inwardly focused, and that can lead to that sense of grumpiness. What I've seen is people who have had some of the most severe diagnoses, severe limitations, but are still these amazing, beautiful people who are investing in the lives of others, and it's because they look at those constraints, they look at those physical limitations and say, okay, that's happening to me now, but what can I still do? We had a woman in our skilled nursing household area who told me one time, she said, my favorite time of day is at night after the girls get everybody put to bed. She said they come into my room and they sit on my bed and they sit on their chairs and they let it all hang out. And she said, at this point in life, there's not a lot I can do physically for other people, but I have accumulated a fair amount of wisdom and experience, and so I can invest that in their lives. And so we sit there in the night after everybody's gone to bed, and I just pour wisdom and love into their lives. And that's what I can do to make a difference. That's my purpose for this season of life. So we have our households in skilled nursing, which are those small households, small groups of people, about 16 folks live together in a household. It's very much based on life as a big family, life as community. So they create their own culture, and the team that works with them. It's a very decentralized model of structure, so we push as much decision-making as we can down to those households. In personal care, that community kind of functions and comes up with their own opportunities to live with purpose and meaning. Because the more we can continue to be focused on serving others, no matter what stage we are at life, the less inward focused we get and the less preoccupied we get with some of our own challenges. So, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time and patience.